Donald Trump has left the door open on renegotiating with Iran over the nuclear deal, despite recent increased tensions. The US president was speaking at the closing news conference at the G7 in Biarritz and was also holding out for hope for a deal with China over their tariff war. For more, we're joined now by Sky News political reporter Tom Connell, live from France. Tom, good morning to you. How much stock should we be putting in Donald Trump's comments?
Peter, I'm not sure anyone knows the answer to that question, maybe not even Donald Trump himself. And it's also worth pointing out that both of his comments were couched in this proposition that both Iran and China should be willing to negotiate with the US because they're right and they come from a position of strength. But these are still interesting comments given last time at the G7, Donald Trump basically ended the whole thing, blew up the communique as soon as he got in Air Force One, got on Twitter and said he disagreed with a whole lot of comments from Justin Trudeau. So given these were his final comments at this G7, and there was one more this time on Twitter which actually said, "Thanks for having me, France," with a highlights reel of what he did during this G7. It's a very different note on which to end. On Iran as well, it's interesting because we had the Iranian foreign minister visiting G7, being invited by France. This did take the US by surprise. Despite that unusual diplomatic move, in this case, Donald Trump didn't appear to be miffed and, in his own way, left the door open for more negotiations on that nuclear deal.
I think they want to make a deal. I'm not sure they have a choice, and I don't say that as a threat. I don't think they have a choice. In the meantime, the United States, which has never collected 10 cents from China, will, in a fairly short period of time, be over $100 billion in tariffs. So I think they want to make a deal very badly. The sanctions are absolutely hurting them horribly. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. They're great people. I don't want to see that. But we can't let them have a nuclear weapon. Can't let it happen. So I think that there's a really good chance that we would meet.
So you heard both comments there from Donald Trump. The first one to do with those sanctions on China. The interesting aspect about all of that is that there is some domestic pressure, in particular on Donald Trump, that the economy's not going as well as he would like. A year and a bit out from an election, the stock markets, of course, have had some recent dives as well. As much as he wants to say we're winning on this, clearly there is some hurt to the global market in the US as well. So I think it's telling there is some domestic pressure there, Peter, as well as, of course, leaving the door open a little bit at least.
And Tom, Scott Morrison has departed after a low-key G7 as an observer nation. He was pleased to get cooperation over online terror content, though.
Yeah, he was. It's a little bit unclear exactly to what extent this will go, but it appears he has funding and some agreement from other nations as well to basically not order at this stage, but ask big tech companies to make sure terror content online is removed. We know it could be live streaming, but also anything that enables or encourages terror as well. So this wasn't a huge issue of the G7, but something he saw as achievable and got agreement on from the other leaders. So he'll be pleased enough, as you say. I thought this was an interesting comment as well from Scott Morrison. And near the end of his news conference, he did say that he thinks these summits do matter, that people might look on from afar, see talkfest, see in this case as well, Peter, no communique, scrapped by President Macron, figuring he wouldn't be able to get agreement from Donald Trump on plenty of things. But Scott Morrison says they are still worth doing.
I know for many it might seem that when these summits are held, people wonder why people come from so far and they gather together to talk about these issues. But I can tell you that when 1 in 5 of your jobs depended on trade, when there are the complex issues that are going on with our global economy, when there are the threats that can reach out and touch the lives of Australians through digital platforms, well, you've got to be here. And I appreciate the invitation from President Macron to be here, to be able to participate and put Australia's perspective and contribution on these issues.
Tom, I was reading this morning that...
so Scott Morrison...
I'm just reading this morning that...
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Scott Morrison was there as an observer only, but it must have been worthwhile for him, though. And you know, it's good for him to be there with the President Trump. And I was reading this morning that Trump called him the King of Australia. And, you know, now he's buddied up with Boris Johnson as well, looking to lock in that trade deal. So quite still, generally, a worthwhile mission for our Prime Minister to be there.
Look, it is. With Donald Trump in particular, that rapport, I know that, some of our viewers are probably sick of us hearing us talk about that, but it is important. That's how he works. He's interpersonal. He goes on gut. He decides, that's a good guy. I don't like that person. That's just how he operates. So it's important to get that rapport, be remembered in some way. Scott Morrison was reportedly having a longer meeting than was originally planned with Donald Trump. He'll have another one later on this year as well, a much more extensive one. Obviously, this is a vital relationship as well. And you mentioned Boris Johnson. Again, the first time the two meet as leaders, it is a chance to meet people, get the relationship, and also show people as well that you can achieve things. Scott Morrison hasn't come to France and pulled off some, miraculous deal on Iran or China, but he's managed to work at those achievable type things and get some progress. So always important. Not often you get Australian leaders at the G7. We've had them invited previously to what was then the G8. But, yeah, always important to be able to fly the flag, and I think he'll be relatively pleased with what was going on, albeit not quite the main issue.